Hello, and welcome to today's speaker series conversation on the power of storytelling with Dr. Meghna Bhat. I'm Bajlan Khalsa, and I'm a member of the Youth Advisory Council for the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. A friendly reminder to those attending today, this will be recorded and available on the Commission's YouTube channel within 1 week of today. I'd like to introduce our guest today, Dr. Meghna Bhat. Meghna was born and raised in Mumbai, India, and her journey is one of resilience and advocacy. Since moving to the United States in 2004, she has been a vocal advocate against gender violence and social injustice. Meghna received her PhD in criminology, law, and justice from the University of Illinois at Chicago with a specialization in gender and women's studies. As a first generation immigrant, Dr. Bhat brings over 17 years of diverse work experience to the table, spanning interdisciplinary research, program and administration, teaching, and event organizing. Her roles at Valor US as a project coordinator and later as a project manager have equipped her with invaluable insights into addressing gender based violence and advocating for change. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bhat as she shares her expertise and perspectives on this crucial topic. Thank you for being here today. Yeah, so we'll get started with the questions for today. So the first question is, you have a very impressive educational background that focuses on criminology, law, and justice, and gender and women's studies, which encompasses many intersections of gender violence prevention. What prompted you to begin storytelling and your own lived experiences to inspire others to speak up against gender violence?
Thank you for asking. I think one of the first experiences with storytelling, I should say, was through elocution competitions in school. I was this young girl who experienced chronic health issues, hypothyroidism, sluggishness, depression, but I didn't know those terms at that time. All I knew that I struggled to meet friends, I struggled to interact with people, and I think elocution competition kind of got me an ounce of confidence in between my very shy, awkward years. But one of the things that I think nudged me towards thinking about the prevalence and impact of gender-based violence was when I myself encountered multiple incidents of street harassment, right? And also witnessed intergenerational cycles of abuse happening in our extended families, in our communities. Once again, I did not know the terms because we did not talk about these things at that time. All I knew that it was traumatizing, it was unpleasant, and should not happen to anyone. So I guess my upbringing with that, I was able to put names and figure out that what this was called, what these unpleasant experiences were called, right? Forms of gender-based violence. I learned much later when I was doing my research. So I did my bachelor's in psychology in Mumbai, India, and then when I came as an international student to the US, honestly, I learned a lot of things later in my life.
So again, I'll repeat the question, which was, what prompted you to begin storytelling and your own lived experience to inspire others to speak up against gender violence?
One of the earliest experiences I had growing up in India was I experienced as a child was chronic health issues, which led to often like isolation and feeling sluggishness, feeling awkward, not making friends. And I think in addition to those experiences that I had, which I really couldn't figure out what was happening because, even though it was hypothyroidism, I didn't know how debilitating it was for me as a child. And I think one of the things that really motivated me to think about it, unfortunately, was my own lived experiences. The more I was out on the streets with my friends, going to public spaces, working in different, workspaces, I experienced street harassment, experienced sexual harassment, and unfortunately, I know that many of my peers, my family members, and even like our community members had experienced the same as well. All I knew at that time that I didn't know the terms, I didn't know the language, and all I knew that should not happen to anyone. It was traumatizing. I felt a lot of sense of shame, guilt, and I felt very alone to be able to share it with anyone. Right. So I think it took me a long time to really place a finger and actually call it a form of gender violence or gender injustice. And now I know that it stems from patriarchy and cultural upbringing and ideologies, which again not only happens in India, it happens in all countries and all cultures. Sadly, one of the things that motivated or nudged me to actually think of prevention education was when I came to UIC for my PhD program. So I did my bachelor's in psychology, then my master's in criminal justice. But that's where I learned about victimology, and
Okay.
then I learned about prevention education when I shadowed the campus advocacy network. And it was this moment of epiphany. I'm like, where has prevention education been all my life? Like, I wish I had the tools and resources to learn, about healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. What do they look like? The importance of consent, right? So to question and challenge these problematic, limited narratives that we see in media as well. So that inspired my research, and I started studying representations of gender violence in especially Bollywood Indian cinema because I grew up with that.
Yeah, I watched Bollywood my life.
Right. It's such an indispensable part of our South Asian culture, and I know it's globally like popular,
Yes.
right? And I think I didn't realize that, again, till later, that street harassment is not romantic. I didn't realize that a sign of, being aggressive is not love. So I think by the time I could recognize those signs, I knew that after my PhD, I wanted to do community education, and that's when I got into storytelling. So I felt that context was a little important to give of like what really shaped my journey towards storytelling. I took oral storytelling and digital storytelling when I was unable to work on my work visa status. And I never looked back. It was so creative, it was so healing, it was fun. And I was like, okay, I saw a way where I could find, bringing storytelling into prevention education. That's where my journey started. I created workshops, I developed workshops, I learned from others, and I feel it's a lifelong learning process. I'm still learning. I mean, I've done so many workshops and keep training in storytelling, but it's still a lifelong journey. But one of the things I just want to wrap up with this is the purpose of storytelling for me is it's not a buzzword for me. For me, it's deeply personal. And for me, personal is political. And I think that's an important piece of it. I feel storytelling needs to be brought in not just for survivor healing and prevention education, but also for having those messy, difficult conversations.
Yes.
Which we all have a tendency to avoid sometimes, right? But we need to unpack the dynamics of gender violence. Otherwise, how are we going to make sure our future generations and our current generations are thriving in environments that are free from harassment and violence?
Yeah, that was definitely an amazing answer, and I really loved learning more about your lived experience. So a follow-up question to that was, what piece of advice would you provide to those who identify as women and girls to find the courage to share their stories like you have?
That's an excellent question. It was very thought provoking. I appreciated the question. I feel that one of the things that I again learned late in my life, but I definitely keep an affirmation for myself every day, remind myself, is identifying my values and embracing my authenticity as a storyteller, as a survivor, as an immigrant brown woman, right? I think sometimes just embracing our authenticity, reminding us from where we have come from, helps us to navigate as our journey as a storyteller. And I think that's first thing which is really important because we have, we have to admit, right? We live in a very capitalist, colonialized,
Yes.
Consumerist journey, media world, I guess. And I think it's so easy to forget where we are and who we are. But second thing I just do want to share is you don't have to share your stories that you've written if you're not ready. The whole world may, say like you have to share your stories to prove your experience or to prove that fact that you've experienced trauma. And I don't believe we need to unless you feel you're ready, you feel you're safe, you feel you have the capacity to process it, and you have the support systems, right?
Yeah.
And many times, as we know, the systems are set up in such a way that survivors are often, I should say, like I don't know, like invited to, not even invited, that's a very soft term, right? We have been compelled to share our stories again and again just to prove that it's happening.
Mhm.
And I completely don't agree with that part. I know the systems are set that way, but someone listening to your story, it's a gift to them that they're able to listen to your story of survival. And that's something which I learned from my colleague, Alisa Zipursky. She says your story is a gift to the others. And sometimes we forget that part.
Yeah.
Right.
And it can be traumatic to constantly having to share your story to folks that in the system that we've created. To have to share your story constantly, it can be tiring and it can be traumatic. And so to put a spin to
Right.
how to share your storytell, how to share your story in storytelling is very, very unique. And I really appreciate you highlighting that.
Absolutely. And one last thing I definitely want to reiterate. I know there's always so many things, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm given the choice, I feel like I want to definitely emphasize that in the world that perpetuates, tokenism and saviorism and, again, a culture of trauma Olympics, we don't have to share stories. We don't have to only share our stories that are difficult or traumatizing to be felt seen, to be felt validated, right?
Yes.
Or to know that our stories and voice matters. Sometimes your story of just relaxing in the park with your puppy and feeling that you are enough is powerful.
Yes.
Yes, we need to create spaces for those stories of struggle and resilience, but we also need to invite stories of joy and healing and just feeling enough.
Yeah. So, moving on, in 2022, you were one of the 45 recipients of the 2022 Seeding Creativity Individual Artist Grant, which was offered by the City of Sacramento Office of Arts and Cultures. With this grant, you created Gulabi Stories, an Asian healing initiative that uses oral and written storytelling to address and destigmatize topics related to health, intimacy, identity, relationships, and the body within the South Asian diaspora. You invited storytellers within South Asian immigrant communities across all generations and diasporas to share their lived experiences on a wide range of topics that are usually perceived as taboo or hush hush. So, as the founder of this initiative, can you provide personal insight on how this 1 year project has contributed to healing and social justice, in particular for women and girls within South Asian communities?
Thank you. I feel, I mean, Stories was launched in February of last year, even though I got the grant in 2022. And just to give like a very, literally a one sentence context, I actually wrote this project proposal when I was on a wait list for a surgery, struggling with reproductive health issues and also remnants of trauma on my body. And even though I hold a lot of privileges as someone who has health insurance, shelter, supportive health, system, therapists, everything, it was a very, very isolating journey because there's still so much of shame and stigma in a culture which constantly tells you what to do. And again, I don't mean to just limited to South Asian culture, right? We see that happening everywhere. We can see it being applied and prevailing everywhere. And I think one of the things that motivated me to write this is because I felt even, especially after the pandemic, and I know COVID is still there in some capacity. I don't want to minimize that for those who are at risk. But I feel, especially during the onset of the pandemic, there was so much of isolation. People they experience grief. We all experience grief, mental health struggles, depression. I had underestimated how much of community people needed.
Yes.
Right? And especially within the South Asian diaspora, especially those who identified as women, non binary, genderqueer, and gender non conforming. And people were excited to be a part of these spaces. We have 56 applications from all over the world, mostly from the US. We had from Australia, Canada, and I had never expected it. I never imagined, honestly. And it was a very humbling experience, right? Because it was a new process for me, my advisors sharing, navigation and helping us navigate and, future directions. One of the things I definitely want to share is that we had 13 stories published on our website with their ongoing consent. And these themes addressed right from grief and miscarriage, to those who have learned lessons during their childhood, like on a simple day, like baking with their mom, in an Indian household, right? Or another young girl experiencing issues with eating disorders, and now she's reclaiming her love for eating and food. And then one of the other stories, which and there are many stories, so I'm not even like, I don't want to even favor any of them, but it's also like one of the things is a transformational haircut that helped a non-binary South Asian feel, find it liberating, yes, feel seen. So there are so many things, but I think one of the things is community building and unpacking topics of taboo and stigma, like one story at a time, right? Yes. It was just beautiful witnessing the solidarity that came out from strangers arriving at that space, people wanting to share their stories with their families, something they'd never done before. So yeah, it was in different directions, and I feel the mission of like, or the vision that I have for social justice and gender justice is people coming to one space, one community, have it feeling safe and feeling visible to share it with each other, and knowing that even though we have come from different backgrounds, we are not alone in this journey.
Yeah, and did you achieve your objective of diversifying and shifting the narratives about personal health, healing, body, and identity journey for South Asian immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers?
Yes, we did more than I had anticipated. And I'm honestly, I'm always touched when I look back at the successes, or I should say glimmers, right? And the milestones that we achieved. And when I say when we achieved, it's not just about the grand technicalities and not just about achieving the grand deliverables, right? It's beyond that. It's leaving a legacy. It's making an impact beyond the stories that were published on our communities. One of the things that I do want to mention was uh, being a first generation immigrant of Indian origin. I learned and unlearned that the South Asian identity, the South Asian immigrant identity, and the diaspora is not a monolith. We cannot assume that every South Asian within the diaspora has the same experience, has the same a journey, right? Had the same definition of the American dream. We all have our own struggles, we have our own milestones, and it's very easy to kind of perpetuate othering, like the good immigrant versus a bad immigrant, that we unfortunately is very problematic in today's thing. And I think we see that in the diaspora too. And I feel these stories help unpack some of that myth that all South Asians are alike. It helped to kind of draw some of those themes that they are humanizing, that kind of people were able to relate even though they were not South Asians. So that's something which I received a lot of feedback through social media, through emails, that people felt very, very seen, not just those who participated, but other people who actually read their stories and felt that, oh, there's someone else who's going through similar thing, even though they may, belong to a different diaspora.
Yeah, so moving on to the third part of our panel for the questions, sorry. So as a first generation immigrant woman, you recognize the importance of coaching and mentoring as another tool to empower women, especially young women. Personally, I have been mentored constantly in the work I've been doing as also being a first generation and going to college. I have folks that I can call up and ask them, hey, I'm thinking about adding this minor into my degree, or I'm thinking about attending law school or not attending law school. And so, given your role of mentoring many individuals in their pursuit of social and gender justice, how have you found mentorship to empower and provide essential support for young women? And what steps can young individuals take to both find mentors and become mentors themselves?
Yes. So one of my earliest memories of mentoring comes through my teachers. And my mom is retired now, but she's a school teacher. She's been a school teacher in India for 30 plus years. So I grew up witnessing the power of her teaching, her mentoring, and her advising on so many students, that I could see the way their lives changed positively because her advice and her guidance, or just the way she showed up for them, helped. So I feel like I was very lucky to have a few teachers in school, even though I was a sluggish, slow, introverted, shy child, who actually believed in me, who wanted the best, and they wanted me to kind of discover my strengths, and mentor me in that way. But I have to be honest too. Like I experienced, I should say, a lack of representation and mentors when I came to the U.S. I was one of the, as far as I know, I was one of the only brown graduate international students in the master's program. And as exciting as it was to kind of, tell people, but it was still a very isolating journey, right?
Yes.
There were one or two mentors who helped me out, helped me write my PhD programs, but I also had mentors who I think I had, miscommunication because I still was struggling with the cultural differences in education system. I was not able to see what was wrong, what was going on, right? So one of the things why I'm sharing the story is because I feel as much as I missed having mentors at that time who were to help me navigate, the PhD program and how do I apply and how do I look for advisors, I had to do that a lot by myself. And I think one of the things I was also very grateful to have still received a lot of advice and mentors for short times, but that still left a very lasting impact, right? So even when I came for my PhD program, I found a lot of mentors, even in the social justice moment. It was just, I was like, oh, there are people who are doing this work. They're South Asian. They're doing gender justice work. This is so exciting. I'm not alone in this movement, right? Yes. So it was just an eye-opening experience. But in terms of the advice, I think a couple of things is also I want to reiterate the fact, and I know it feels like a recurring theme coming in my conversation, is not forgetting from where you come from, right? Not forgetting your roots, kind of embracing your authenticity. And I think as a mentor and a mentee, it is very important to remember that. I feel like transparent communication, like letting, as a mentor, like how can you let your mentees know what can you offer? What are your limitations? If there is any miscommunication, to have that respectful dialogue and communication, then assuming that the other people have understood it. And I think a lot of I know I'm being like very specific, but that's like one of the examples, many examples that can come up, right? Um, I think it's very important to find mentors that again align with your values. Yes. Right? Yeah. Who have so I see it as my therapist always says there's more than two things can be true, right? And one thing is that you can still in terms of you can find mentors who hold you accountable to constantly evolve and change, but with compassion. And you can have mentors who bring out the best in you and help you identify your voice and empower you to do your best. And they could be the same or they could be different mentors. Yeah. Right. So I think, I mean, I feel like my advice is kind of like fabric, within the fabric of what I'm sharing right now. And the last piece, which came from my experience, but also talking with a lot of Black and brown women of color, especially in academia. I feel, and I'm just giving academia as an example. I know it happens in other settings too. Is just in general is about again having that cultural competency to talk with students who are international students, who are students who don't speak English, right? Just having that transparent experience of communicating your needs, yes, your struggles. I think that's really important, and not forgetting that our mentors are human beings too, and they can be flawed too, and also just to kind of not defend, but also hold space for that and recognize that. Yeah. And so we'll end off with our last question, which is so our Youth Advisory Council, which I'm on, has multiple initiatives around safety, education, and healthcare for youth in California. Some of these initiatives relate directly to teen dating violence, self-defense education, Title IX, sexual health education, and safe spaces for LGBTQIA plus youth. So, considering your impactful journey in advocating against gender violence and social injustice, particularly within diverse community settings, what guidance would you provide to aspiring storytellers aiming to authentically address, confront, and impact social justice issues such as the ones we are raising in our council within communities around California? Yes, I feel like the youth are already doing the amazing, beautiful work out there. I seriously, like, I feel I am always so deeply inspired. I just definitely want to say that before I give any of my advice. I feel I'm preaching to the choir. But I mean, honestly, I feel I've always been so inspired by the youth advocacy and leadership, like like yourself and many others in the council and out there, because I feel like, oh my God, like it's a way of telling my younger self, like, I wish I had these tools and resources and the courage and softness to advocate for issues that matter, right? But I think one of the things I do want to mention that sometimes our, again, the mainstream culture and the world of advocacy can seem like it is my way or the highway. You have to do advocacy and create culture change or do storytelling in a certain way, right? Or it's not the right way. And I feel like there's no one right way to do it. I feel like as long as our advocacy work, our storytelling work, our culture change work is not harming anyone, is not being offensive, is not being, hurting anyone's culture, I think that's an important nuance to keep in mind. But there's no one way of doing it, right? Correctly. So one of the things I do want to mention is like whether you take baby steps or you take mighty strides, you are creating that change. Today, it may look like just posting something on social media, a story. You may be resharing someone's story. Tomorrow, it may be listening to someone's story and advocating for gender neutral restrooms in your school. Tomorrow, the next day, it could be like, hey, you found your major because you've listened to a story and decided to pursue theater, right?
Yeah.
Um, so every day we listen to these stories and we are moved by that, even if it may not be the most visible thing that we are aware of. So I have always learned and unlearned a lot of things, even as an adult, because again, I didn't grow up here. So I learned a lot about, I should say, like pronouns and how to be an LGBTQ co-conspirator, not just beyond the performative allyship, right? And a lot of the historical context and everything that is usually erased, yes, from the textbooks. So one of the things that I learned is through stories. And I think one of the advice that I have is also you have superpowers, like use them. And I know sometimes it's not the most visible thing, and I usually ask that question to my storytellers in workshops. I'm like, what's your superpower? Because we all have one, more than one, right? And I think sometimes that change may be very small. It may feel very small, but it is still mighty, right? Yes. Like just calling up or lobbying for funding, for critical services for domestic violence agencies, for example, for prevention education, or lobbying with advocates for arts and culture funding. Yes, it could be anything, but I think you are being a part of the bigger story, even if you're not actively, being a storyteller, if that makes sense. And I think one last thing I definitely want to mention is meeting where our communities are. Right? I feel it's very easy to get swayed into the very fancy, elitist, academic, social justice language. I myself have got lost into it. I myself am guilty of using it in the past, thinking that that will make me feel smarter. But I know the main purpose often gets erased, is how I want to create the change. And we don't have to be all saying the same things, looking alike, looking in the same direction. So just meeting where the communities are to do the social change work, to do the storytelling work, talking to them, not talking kind of with them instead of talking to them. Those are things that really matter. Creating language accessibility for storytellers, and I mean I can go on, but I'm going to take a pause there. But I just wanted to like highlight some of the things that I have learned, and I hope it's helpful for other storytellers and young girls and women too.
Yeah, and so now this would be the time where are there any questions in the chat that we could ask from Dr. Bhat? Okay, awesome. We'll take that one. I think I'm reading my writing. So we do have one question, and so it's, can you share more about holding space for folks' stories, in healing and joy and being enough?
Oh, I love that question. Yes. So one of the things that kind of reminded me of why I need to also create spaces for joy and healing and being enough is because one of the first times that I was in a storytelling workshop, and the it was a very dismissive experience. I shared my story about my sexual violence experience, and I felt it was a very distracted, dismissive experience, right? There was often, and again, I think the facilitator did apologize, and I know that we are all learning, so I don't, it's like a learning process. But one of the things I had promised that as a facilitator, I'm not going to practice that. I'm going to more like create these open spaces of joy. I am not a healer. I'm not a therapist. I want to be, I'm very mindful of those titles, but I also want to mention that I'm very aware of my privileges, but also kind of creating trauma informed spaces. And what are safe spaces? Safety looks different for everyone, healing looks different for everyone. And one of the things that we are learning, even I'm just saying, like as South Asians in general, like success and happiness looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
Not everybody, wants to follow the checklist. We take our time to follow those dreams. So my the coming back to the question is, how do you create spaces where people of all unique, diverse experiences are welcomed, are felt seen, and are felt like, they feel that, okay, I'm enough and I can focus on my healing. I'm not there to define healing for them. It's for them to reclaim it the way they want and when they want. So I hope that answered your question. But I love this question and I can go on.
And then I think there's another one.
It's from the chat.
Okay. So this one is about Globby Stories. Is Globby Stories continuing this year and beyond? If so, where can we find more info?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. Yes, so Gulabi Story is the grant that funded ended in October. Just to give you some context, October of 2023, we are looking actively seeking funding so that we can continue expanding and diversifying the stories, within the Gulabi Stories project. We would love to welcome and invite, storytellers across the U.S. So, like trying to do a traveling, storytelling workshop. Also invite like South Asians of other origins that are missing from the narrators in Gulabi stories. So like from Bangladeshi origin, Bhutanese, Indo-Caribbean origin, we want to welcome you all as well. So stay tuned. We have a website, gulabistories.com. We also have an Instagram account. It's gulabi_stories. We do have a Facebook account, which is not super active, but definitely Instagram and the website. There's also an interest form, like a submit. You can submit an interest form online expressing your interest, and that helps us document the need for more Gulabi stories when we apply for funding. So, and we always look for collaborations, like community partners. We love to amplify their work and we love to be, mutually work with them as well. So.
Yeah. Are there any other questions in the chat before we wrap up?
You mentioned you're learning and relearning things, which is a practice I share. What are some things you wish you would have learned earlier in life or in your professional career?
I love that. These are such amazing, thought-provoking questions. I appreciate you all. Yes, I feel at the beginning of my career, I think, so if I see it from a different levels, right? As a South Asian immigrant, I held so many privileges. Yes, I did have my share of racialized and gendered trauma and oppression that I don't want to minimize. And also, struggle with health and stuff. But I also I hold a lot of privileges. And I think one of the things that I unlearned only while getting away from my hometown and coming to the US is like the impact of casteism and classism, right? And how patriarchy and nationalism and plays a major role in marginalizing the marginalized. And I have been complacent in many situations where I wish I had the courage to speak up, but I also did not know the words and the language. So now I try to push myself out of the comfort zone more often. I speak up more often. I call in and have those dialogues. But those are the things I wish I had, like again, mentors and different tools and resources, which would have helped me navigate some of those uncomfortable but very critical conversations, and kind of tools and strategies of
how to deal with these situations.
Yeah. And one last time, I wanted to check in about the chat. Is there any other questions? Okay. So we're going to wrap up. I wanted to again thank you, Dr. Butt, to joining the commission on the power of storytelling, and I really enjoyed everything you said. And you taught me a lot about storytelling. I am feeling very inspired. I probably should go on Gulabi Stories and read the stories that you mentioned, and maybe someone from our commission or someone in the audience will be submitting a interest form for Gulabi. And so thank you all for joining as well and tuning in. And I don't know if you have any last comments or anything like that that you want to share with the audience.
Yeah, yes, thank you so much, Vaseem, for hosting this with such, I enjoyed our discussion, so beautifully you have hosted this. I want to thank the commission and Kim and the team for having me here. It's always an opportunity and I feel, yeah, I just want to invite everybody to like share their true personal stories, but even if you don't want to share, that's fine. Keep writing it for yourself. It doesn't have to be for the whole world. It's still, an important part of who you are. So thank you.
Thank you.